Hello and welcome to another episode of Gardenside Chats. Today we are going to be talking about asparagus. So somebody had asked if we could talk about some topics of perennials that you can grow in your garden, and asparagus is a really timely one to talk about right now. And I'm here at the Veterans Urban Farm where we have a stand of asparagus that's about 10 years old. So we've been doing asparagus here for a little while and want to relay some information to you all, because right now it is both the time to be harvesting and planting asparagus. So asparagus is a perennial crop, and what that means is that it is something that you plant and that it grows back year after year, versus most of our garden crops we think about are annuals, like tomatoes and lettuce and carrots and things like that. Those you plant them and they either die when you harvest them or they die when the freeze comes in the fall. So asparagus is perennial, so it's something that's going to last for many years. And when you plant asparagus, it's going to last, I'd say, between 10 and 20 years is how long it will produce really well for you. So that's a long time to get a crop from just one planting. It's really important when you plant asparagus, because it's going to be there for so long, that you really think about the location. Asparagus needs well-drained soil, so it cannot be in a really soggy location. The wetness will cause the roots to rot. It needs full sun, so you want to make sure that you're getting at least 8 hours of sunlight every day for your asparagus. And you need a nice, healthy soil. So amending what you have with some compost. If it's really a sticky clay, you want to make sure that you work it really well before planting your asparagus. Something that asparagus does is it grows really tall. When you're harvesting it, it's smaller, but throughout the summer and fall, it grows really tall. Our asparagus here grows over 6 feet. It gets really big. And so where you have the asparagus in your garden, you want to make sure that it's not going to be shading out something else. So if you have it just on the south side of where you plan on planting some tomatoes, it could totally shade out your tomatoes, and that would be bad. So we have ours on the very northern edge of the garden, the very back of the garden, where it's not going to shade out any of our other annual garden crops. So when you're thinking about planting asparagus, you really want to choose that location, because if it's going to be there for 10 or 20 years, you just, in addition to what the plants need, you should think about what you need and what's going to be convenient for you, or if you're thinking of maybe moving your garden in a couple years, just make sure that you're planning this one out really well, because it's going to be there for a while. So asparagus, like I said, you can plant it now, and because it is a perennial crop, it will grow back for many years. However, in the first couple of years, you will not be harvesting from your asparagus plant. So if you want asparagus next spring, then you should have probably thought of that 2 or 3 years ago. So this is a long-term thing. Asparagus, since it's going to be there for so long, the first couple years, you really need to make sure that the plants get established and they can establish a strong root system in your garden. That's really, really important because in the first couple years it will send up some shoots that you're going to be really tempted to harvest, but don't do it because you need the plants to grow and establish themselves in the space for at least the first 2 years. So how we plant asparagus is using what we call crowns. I don't have any with me today, and we're actually not going to be planting any today. I'll demonstrate harvesting, but the planting is a fairly easy thing to do. So you buy these crowns, and these are essentially a bare root plant. It almost looks like a big spider web of roots. You get them at your local garden center, and you just plant these crowns in your garden. So when you're thinking of the varieties of asparagus that you want, there's a few sort of common household name ones, like the Mary Washington or the Jersey Knight. Purple Passion is one too, if you've ever seen purple asparagus. That's a common one. And these are probably the typical ones you're going to find at your local garden center. They're good varieties. They're mostly male, which asparagus does have male and female plants, and it is the male plants which produce all those little spears you want. And so you'll probably see on some of these varieties that they say all male or mostly male, and those are the ones that to get some they have to have some females in there for the cross pollination, but for the most part you're going to see the all male ones. Most varieties are self-pollinating, which means that like a Jersey Knight can pollinate a Jersey Knight, but if you were to get a couple of different varieties, it would actually increase your production. So if you had some Mary Washingtons and some Jersey Knights together in your garden, that would increase your production a little bit. So it's always nice to choose more than one variety just to mix things up. So you've gone to your garden center, you've gotten a couple varieties of asparagus crowns, and you've selected your garden site where you want them to be. It's well drained, you got full sun, the soil is prepared, and so now it's time to plant those crowns. What you'll want to do is you're going to dig trenches. You want to dig trenches maybe about a foot wide, or maybe about as wide as a regular shovel, like a spade shovel, and about 8 inches deep. So you want to, and in that trench is where you're going to set those crowns. In the trench, you're going to put each one of those crowns about a foot apart, and between trenches, you can do trenches about 2 feet apart. So I don't know if you can see one of our rows of asparagus right here at the Veterans Urban Farm. This is a 4-foot wide row of asparagus, and we have 10 years ago when we planted this, we dug 2 trenches down this 4-foot row. And so if you can see, if we can come this way a little bit, but right here, you can see right here is where one of the crowns was buried, and we have some asparagus coming up. And about 2 feet this way, we've got another crown of asparagus in the trench just adjacent to it. So if you've got like a raised bed that's 4 feet wide, whether it's in ground like this, or in a wooden box or something, you can get about 2 rows, 2 trenches in the in your garden. So you see these asparagus coming up here. So remember, when you're planting, dig a trench about 1 foot wide and 8 inches deep. Set those asparagus crowns in the trench about 1 foot apart from each other in the trench. And the trenches should be about 2 feet apart. When you've got them planted in that trench, you want to fill it back in, and you want to mulch it heavily with straw. You can see out here we've got a lot of straw on top. It helps protect the soil, and it helps keep weeds from growing. Let's talk a little bit about the life cycle of asparagus. So like I said, right now is a good time to plant. You're going to plant it, you're going to put them in those trenches, you're going to cover it, and you're just going to kind of leave it until the fall. So what happens is technical difficulties. So when you plant it, what you're going to see is, the first thing you're going to see is these little fronds coming up. So the asparagus right here you see that we eat, if we left that, it would turn into a big fern. And so that's what's eventually, as it gets warmer, these little spears will come up sort of skinnier and frawnier with little leaves on them. And at that point, they're no longer edible, and they're ready to grow into a big fern. So we're going to come up, there's going to be big ferns that grow all summer. Like I said, they can grow really big. Ours here get up to 6 feet tall. They get taller than me, and it kind of becomes a big jungle. So what they're doing is all summer, late spring, all summer, and during the fall, they're collecting energy from the sun through their leaves and storing it underground in their roots. And that is sort of the key to what asparagus does, is all summer it collects energy and stores it underground in its roots. Asparagus is it's a great saver. They've got like a savings account, and it's in their roots underground. In the fall, when the temperature starts to cool off, your asparagus ferns will start to turn brown and die back. And once all your ferns have pretty much turned brown and died, we cut them down. So you can come through with a pair of hand pruners. You can come through maybe with a weed whacker. If you have like a brush hog or something, I don't know what scale you're doing this on, but you want to cut it down to the ground and make sure that it's mulched for the winter time. In the spring, when it starts to get warm, usually in early April, is when your asparagus spears start to pop up. And what's great about asparagus is it's one of the first things that comes out of the garden in the spring, because it's been storing all that energy. It's been waiting all winter to start growing again. And so once it starts getting warm, these little spears pop up, and that's when it is time to harvest them. Like I said, in the first 2 years, you really need to resist that urge to harvest those spears in the spring, because it is just it's a long-term game. You need to let them establish themselves. You need to let them establish their roots and start putting energy into their underground storage in those first 2 years. But since our asparagus here is about 10 years old, Well, we need to harvest these. These spears grow really fast. In a day, it can go from, a spear can grow 6 inches. They grow really, really fast, and so you really need to harvest them every day in the spring, and they produce for about a month, depending on the varieties you have and the weather conditions. But so I'm going to demonstrate harvesting asparagus, and then we're going to talk a little bit about pests. So I need to get my harvest tools here. All right. So I've got a knife and I've got a bucket. You don't always need a knife. You can snap them with your hands, but using a knife is easier, especially if you have a lot of asparagus to harvest like I do today. Something I want to point out today is that, because we are in the times of COVID-19, we take a lot of steps and measures to make sure that our harvesting equipment is clean. So we always, you can see these are marked with red, and our red tools and equipment here at the Urban Farm are only used for harvesting. So this bucket with the red on it would never be used to put food scraps in, or chicken manure, or compost, or something like that. This is only used for harvesting. And so our harvesting tools are washed and sanitized before every time that we harvest, and we wash our hands. So want to make sure that you are being clean when you're harvesting, and I just wanted to share a little bit about what we're doing here. So I'm going to find some of this asparagus right here.
Good question. Would pruning shears be quicker and more ergonomic?
For harvesting,
Yes.
You could use pruning shears too, if that is what you would like to do. You can use what works for you. You could use scissors or a knife or pruning shears. I find a knife to be quick because you can just do it real quick. They're not, when you're harvesting them, they're really tender, and so but you can use whatever you'd like. Can you come down here? So, actually, this is great. We have before I harvest, we have 2 asparagus beetles. I believe they're mating on this little spear of asparagus right here.
It's not like focused on it.
So here, let me just see. Don't know if you guys can see that, or oh my gosh. All right. Well, maybe we'll find some more. We definitely will. And even on here, we can see some. On this one, we can see some eggs. Right here, you can see some of those eggs from the asparagus beetle. I'm just gonna.
Can you harvest it and show it closer?
Yeah, that's what I'll do. So when you harvest, I take the knife, I take my thumb, and you just kind of do it like that. You want to get it close to the ground. And so you can see on here there are some bite marks from the asparagus beetle, and you can see the eggs which are stuck on there.
They ask what variety we have.
So the question is what variety are these? And I honestly do not remember from 10 years ago. However, I know that we planted 3 different varieties. My guess is that we definitely have some Jersey Knights and some Martha Washingtons. We got these crowns from local garden center, so it's going to be one of your common ones. But we did plant multiple varieties because it's going to help with your production. Even though they do self-pollinate, if you have multiple varieties, it will increase your production. So, the asparagus beetle, they're kind of a pain. They will make your stuff look a little ugly, but we've never had such a problem that it's really ruined it. It's all still edible, even if the bug takes a few bites out of it. So I don't know if you can see, we've got a couple of asparagus beetles here. They are black and orange. And they're two different species of asparagus beetles. One is more orange than black, and one is more black than orange. But you will be able to identify them because they will be the bugs that are eating your asparagus. If you want to get rid of the asparagus beetles, one of the best things you can do is to go through in the early season and look for them on those first spears. You want to take them, you can squish them in your hand, you can throw them in a bucket of soapy water, but just sort of as you're going through, kill them. And if you get them early, you can really help and knock back the population. There are other ways that you can take care of the asparagus beetles as well. Some people come through and just knock them off. You can spray your plants with soapy water. If you wanted to, you could use like an organic pyrethrin if it's getting really bad. But like I said, we're not doing this commercially. So if our plants get a little ugly or a few bite marks in them, they are still perfectly tasty and edible. And so I've also heard of people coming through and burning them. I do a little more research on that before you looked into that. But you can see we've got some bite marks. We've got some eggs on here. And you see how this spear is kind of got a little curve to it. That is sort of a telltale sign that you have asparagus beetles, is when they're not growing straight, when they get these little curves in them. And there's actually some really gnarly ones here that have been eaten by the beetles. And you see that curve, and that's one of the plant's responses to being munched on by the asparagus beetles. So yeah, this one you saw me harvest with a knife. This one I'll show you. Just take my hand down to the base. We can snap it. Usually one side snaps real easy, the other side's still connected, and you kind of need to pull it off so it's not as clean as a cut. You can see this one was cut with the knife and this one was just sort of snapped. And so it's definitely faster with the knife. And what I like about the knife versus a pair of scissors or the pruning shears is with the knife you can cut it and grab it in your same hand. If you use a scissors or a pruning shears, you sort of have to use two hands. And so if you have a lot to harvest, I can go around with this bucket in one hand and just harvest in the other and put it right into the bucket. We can we'll do another example here of harvesting. Let's find, do we have any that are sort of starting to frond out?
Yeah, there's one behind you.
Okay, this one. Yeah, so you can see this one. So like let's look at the difference between these two plants. This one, the head is really tight. It's really narrow. And then we look at the one to the left here, and you can see each one of these pieces is kind of sticking out. It kind of has
Little arms.
Yeah, little arms. And so we're not going to harvest this one because this one right here, this is ready to turn into a big frond. It's going to be that big fern that grows all summer and collects energy. This one right here, this one is still ready to be eaten. It's still going to be tender. These bigger ones, they're going to be a little tougher. They're not going to be that nice, beautiful, tender asparagus that you would expect from your garden or from the farmer's market. Honestly, if you've never had garden-grown asparagus or asparagus from the farmer's market, this will really maybe change your mind about asparagus, because it can be so tender and so just so tasty. It's way better than other asparagus that is not fresh, and asparagus that is maybe grown elsewhere. So it's one of those things that's, to me, is truly seasonal, and the texture and the taste is sort of unmatched when you grow it yourself or when you get it locally in season. So
there's a good question. What are the plants you grow around your asparagus? What do you companion plant with them? They're weeds, and so perennial plantings, you have to watch out for weeds.
So the question is what are the plants that we are growing around our asparagus? These plants are weeds. One of the problems with growing perennial crops is that you're only growing one thing there, and what that does is it allows for other perennial weeds and annual weeds too to come in. So most of what we have here is bindweed, and it's a big pain in the butt, but it's really mostly an issue this time of year in the spring when the fronds aren't big, because like I said, these turn into huge bushes, 6 feet tall, and at that point it shades out a lot of the weeds. But this time in the spring, the weeds and these perennial weeds like bindweed sort of become a problem. So to answer your question, we don't plant anything around them. It's mostly because there's really just a short period of time when they're growing in the spring, and after that they get so big that it's hard to grow other things with them. We have tried in the spring to do some quick things like radishes that you can plant in between them, and in the summertime we've tried to take advantage of some of that shade. You can do something like, you could grow some herbs. Cilantro is something that we've had mixed success with. Cilantro doesn't want to grow in the summer, but we always want to have it in our pico de gallo when the tomatoes are growing, and so we've had some mixed success with that. But really, we don't grow anything with these asparagus on purpose, but the weeds will come. So
this person says they have strawberries and asparagus growing together.
Mm-hmm.
We have some over that way we talked about. We have them nearby, but not planted together.
yeah, so somebody commented that they have strawberries growing with their asparagus, and that works for them. We have some strawberries growing nearby, not right in the asparagus, but they could go well together. In the summertime, I imagine that the asparagus shades out the strawberries and probably reduces what they are able to grow, their full potential. I would caution, if you want to plant things in with your asparagus, to just be cautious not to damage the asparagus plants. So if you want to make a row down the center or in between your asparagus, you want to make sure you're not damaging those roots, because these are your long-term investment. You want to, and that those roots underground, that's where they're storing their energy, and it's really important to keep that root system intact so that they can produce to their fullest extent. So definitely, would encourage you to experiment around with those types of things, and we certainly have in the past, but we've found sort of that the best way is for us, may not be the same for you, but the best way for us is to just grow the asparagus by themselves. All right, I think that is all I have for today. So we talked about the life cycle of asparagus, how they grow ferns in the summer to store all of their energy, so that in the spring they can produce those tender, tasty little spears. We talked about planting them in trenches, trenches 8 inches deep and a foot wide, and that your trenches should be at least 2 feet apart. We talked about mulching them after you've planted them and buried them in their trenches. Talked about asparagus beetles and trying to pick them off early in the spring. Harvesting them every day when they're coming, but not for the first 2 years. So you really want to wait and let them establish themselves and store all of that energy and build up their little savings account underground. And to enjoy them. Fresh asparagus is great. You don't have to do anything to it. You can just eat it right out of the ground. It's great on the grill. There's a lot of ways you can cook it. And now is a great time to be harvesting and planting your asparagus. So get out there on this beautiful day, dig some trenches, and I hope you all enjoyed today's Garden Side Chat. Remember to like, plant, and subscribe, and we will see you tomorrow.